Absolutely.
Mm,
Well, and I do think it's that's probably a good way to segue into sort of this bigger picture, this broader
mhm,
conversation, because there are a lot of real large macro sort of movements underway that are going to affect all of this. And if you're a CIO trying to, to me, and that's again where I look at Hume, it's like reading the tea leaves. Where is all this going? What does this
mhm.
mean? What should I be focused on? And so I don't know if there's one of those that you wanted to start with, but I think there's some really these big sweeping. Well, actually, I am going to start pick the one
Sure.
because the one that I thought was most interesting, not even because it was the article was all that great, but it's a there's a couple of these that I think are topics that we just aren't talking about enough, and that's
Okay.
specifically about the ROI or the practical use cases um, in terms of how AI is being applied. And so there are two different articles, both in the Wall Street Journal. One was specifically on how organizations are assessing the ROI of AI investments. And the other one is about specifically in supply chain, traditional supply chains, how they are used and starting to leverage AI to solve specific practical problems. And I saw both of these as
Mhm.
very interesting. The first in the article that you pointed out on ROI, I think it talked about 43% of, I forgot, it was Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 companies are preparing to invest $100 million in Gen AI. So we talked about the $10 million investment. They're already making bigger plans. And then I look at the supply chain one, and what was really struck me is companies that we aren't really even talking about in the context of AI, companies like Celonis, which is a process mining and task mining company,
Mhm.
right? Helping organizations apply specific applications of AI to solve very specific targeted problems, in this case around supply chain. And so I thought it was really interesting because we often talk about this big macro stuff. And the real question is, well, how do you start to bring this down? So I'm curious your take on sort of both of those perspectives.
Yeah. So first, from a very tactical perspective, the return on investment on technology, at the end of the day, that is percentage. That is based on an actual amount of money that you are expecting to get back. If you are spending, let's call it $100 million, uh, typically, when you're doing this for a technology that is fairly emerging, you are trying to calculate for a 300% or more return, partially because there's a lot of risk involved. There's a lot of things that may not end up happening, but you want to at least be able to build out a solid expectation that you could get to, call it $300 million in return on an annual basis. And some of that might fall through, and for all sorts of different reasons. But if you can't get there, it starts being hard to say why you should spend that $100 million in the first place if you can't get to that upside of, call it 3, 5 to 10x return. I think beyond 10x, honestly, if you're seeing returns, in the beyond that, you probably have something broken in your company beyond AI. An example being, if you're flying 10,000 people a year to go training somewhere, when you can turn that into a YouTube video, obviously you're going to get like, a gazillion percent ROI, but that's just because you're doing things in a really bad way. But I think that's the challenge, that we have to equate AI at the end of the day to saved costs or additional productivity or additional revenue. And one of my concerns is that we're starting to think of AI just as a way to cut labor rather than a way to actually improve uh, services and improve business outcomes. And that's what I liked about the supply chain article, that it talked about a part of your company that you could actually improve by using AI rather than simply trying to perhaps replace contact center agents, which is this mission that technology has been trying to do for decades now with very little success. I think all of us have been annoyed more than anything else by technology's attempts to replace agents.
Yeah, well, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I think that in all likelihood, all it does is shift because at the end of the day, as humans, there are times where we want to talk to another human, and that's not going to change or go
Mhm.
away. What I thought, I think, so we're going to talk, I think, next about the sort of emerging battles, and I think there's a handful of these battles that are emerging, and one of them is in I'll call it the broad versus tactical, or maybe that's right, horizontal versus vertical application. And
Mhm.
so the supply chain one is a very, a classic case of this verticalization where people coming in and applying it in very targeted use cases. And then I look at the other end of the spectrum, and the ROI article talked about, for instance, that Microsoft Copilot is $30 per seat, right? And that is like general productivity use. Now, I use Gen AI. I actually have three of different Gen AI agents that are Gen AI tools that I use on a daily basis. So I get the productivity gain, but I think it's going to be a lot harder to justify a $30 a month times 10,000 people ROI on general productivity, because it's going to be, even if it's real, it's going to be so hard to quantify. How am
Mhm.
I being more productive? How am I adding more to the bottom line because I'm saving this few minutes a day using Gen AI for something? Whereas with these vertical applications that are sort of right now, traveling off radar a little bit, I think that's where you're going to see that exponential ROI that's going to be truly transformative. And going back to that supply chain article that I thought was really interesting, is something that I'm a huge believer in, is that when you are doing this right, you will simultaneously improve your efficiency, reduce costs. Maybe it may be an employee thing, but more likely it's in just normal waste,
Mhm.
and you're going to deliver a better customer experience all at the same time, right? And so that's where you get that exponential ROI. And so I think it is going to be this interesting sort of battle play out as we get
Mhm.
past these initial hype cycle stages and people start really figuring out how to apply it. So they were both fascinating from kind of juxtaposition.
And I think there's a lot of room for a lot of these process-based companies like Celonis, ServiceNow, the Automation Anywheres of the world to really, frankly, make bank on this AI trend if they can align things correctly. I feel like a lot of AI companies that are trying to make claims about being the providing business AI are missing a lot of the foundational process mapping and process automation capabilities that other companies have just have been in the position to spend a decade to build up. This honestly is not a great space for new startups to come into, just because so many established companies have such a head start in building all that foundational data and not having to figure out where to get it from.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think it's
Mhm.
I think it's going to be just really interesting to see how this plays out. And I don't, I remember talking to Phil Donahoe, the at the time he was the CEO of ServiceNow, and
Mhm.
I was talking about the platform wars, um, between like ServiceNow and Salesforce, and his word was, there's room for all of the platforms, and I think we're going to see sort of the same thing with the AI platforms. There's room for all of them insofar as, um, I think organization CIOs and business leaders are going to become very strategic about where they're applying it in different ways. And I think that's partly why we're going to have this entire conversation today about AI, but it's not all one
Mhm.
conversation. It's AI is going to become this incredibly diverse. It's already this incredibly diverse, nuanced topic that attaches and affects everything. And so I think, if you're a CIO today, you need to start evolving your thought that it's not, I bristle when people go, you need AI strategy. No, you don't really. You need a business strategy, but you need to be asking yourself how you're infusing AI into every element of that business strategy, because it's probably going to affect it across every element of it.
Yeah, and also we're seeing these separate types of systems. So the system of record obviously has been around for a very long time, but now we're seeing these systems of interaction, these systems of process process definition really coming into play. Like ServiceNow, yes, it is a system of record, but really what it does well is it defines process very well for what you're trying to do, and being able to do that either on a departmentally specific basis, like some of these financial close solutions that walk you through the close to be able to cut that time in half, or to be able to do that on a service basis or whatever. That those process mapping capabilities are important, and then you have to be able to use that to transform what you're doing digitally, something that I've heard you've done once or twice in your career, Charlie.
Yeah, I do think what's interesting too you're dead on. I think that what we're seeing is, again, we go through these cycles, and I think we're seeing the re-rise in prominence of process and how that applies, because it becomes the anchor for all this automation, which then becomes the anchor for all the application of AI to then help drive and enable that automation. And I think and I think the other element of that, and that again, the reference, like when I was reading this, I've been following Celonis for a long time, and it honestly caught me a little off guard. I knew they had elements of AI, but when I read this article, it's like, yeah, because this is about very targeted, right? This isn't necessarily about this broad-based application. We're going to, completely transform our supply chain with AI. No, we're going to apply AI in these very specific stages where we can get that benefit. And I think that's interesting. So,